All right, welcome everybody to today's very exciting event, how to hit record sales, record growth this holiday season, regardless of the economy. My name is Ari Sherbel. I will be your host from Growth at Webeyez. Joined with me is a brilliant panel from Perry Ellis, Diane von Furstenberg, and Gorilla Group Agency. Maybe just before we get started and we do an introduction of all the brilliant panelists, or as we start to meet the panelists, I would love for everybody in the chat to please enter your name, where you're calling in from. Would love to get a feel of you guys. This is a really special event with incredible guests. So just to cover what we're going to do and how it's going to run, we are going to meet the expert panel. You are going to learn about some surprising e-commerce data, how small fixes can generate massive results and revenue. You're going to get experts, where the experts share their growth secrets, and we're going to do a live Q&A. So maybe just to start off, Alexis, would love if you gave a little introduction to yourself. You're the Director of Content Strategy at Gorilla Group, an awesome human being based out of Cleveland, Ohio. Tell us a little bit about yourself and how you're doing.
Sure. I'm in Cincinnati, so go Bengals. Yes, I work for Gorilla Group. So I've been here over a year, but I've been working in content strategy for over 15 years. So really passionate about content strategy on both the marketplace side, omni-channel, as well as the owned and branded side. So as we think about content, it's really, working to drive optimization and conversion. And so just really passionate about what that means for overall e-commerce business. Yeah.
Very good. I get it confused between the C's, the Cleveland and the Cincinnati, but you're in Ohio. Fantastic. Excited to hear more about that and the football team. Claudia Gottenclays, how are you doing? E-commerce director at DVF, Rockstar in Manhattan. How are you doing?
I'm good. I'm really excited to be here. I'll tell you a little bit about myself. I've been at DVF for actually 4 years now. I was historically at Macy's, Net-a-Porter Group, in different roles. But now I kind of oversee overall e-com operations, paid marketing, merchandising, and our P&L. But yeah, it's definitely been a very interesting transition, especially from a pre-COVID world and then kind of moving forward, since technology has been changing, the way we talk to our consumers have been changing, and so on. So it's been a very interesting ride, but an exciting one to say the least. Yeah,
brilliant. Excited to hear more. And Frank, all the way from Miami, marketing director for Perry Ellis. Frank, would love to hear a little bit about the work that you do and how it's going in Miami.
Yeah, thanks for having me on, and great to be spending time and sharing time with the panelists here and the people that are joining the webinar. I'm currently, the best way I can summarize my current role at Perry Ellis here is I'm in charge of all the retention strategies here for Perry Ellis across our 6 DTC brands. So anything that's rolling up between email strategy, CRM, lifecycle, and loyalty and SMS is something that's under my care right now and guidance with the great team that I help support. And then prior to that, I was the head of marketing at Pet Supermarket. So, a couple of different various roles there in terms of running acquisition and retention strategies across. So glad to be here and glad to be sharing time with everyone.
All right. Excited to dig in and hear from you on your secrets, on your strategies, on your proven techniques. One thing from our end that we find very insightful, very opportunistic, very exciting, especially for e-commerce directors, marketing directors, and any kind of shop store that sells anything online, is that when you want to hit growth, actually there are small things that generate a lot of revenue opportunities. So one of the things that we've seen is that 88% of users are unlikely to return to your site after a bad website experience, which means that if you make some small fixes, out of stock messages, low slowed page time, gift cards that are faulty, etc., those are things that can actually increase your revenue while you are working on your other things, but it's those small fixes that generate a massive return. So maybe just to start off, that's like a challenge that we've seen, a challenge of monitoring your site across the full way. But maybe Alexis, to start with you, what's the biggest challenge that you have when you face the holiday season for the work that you do?
Well, I do think that every category is going to have their own challenges. Some are going to be very price sensitive, some that might be a CPG based category will think price is going to be king, and they're going to, be very promotion centric, or just really feel that price is going to be their number one driver. Whereas, others might have inventory or availability issues, especially, with all of the supply chain drivers that are happening right now. So I think that each category is going to feel things differently. But really, where I sit as a content director, content needs to be able to feel fresh and be nimble, to be able to break through the noise for holiday. So what I see in terms of how you do that for holiday is to make sure that messaging is really on point. So what is your holiday messaging? Kind of develop that and think about it kind of first and foremost for your holiday content calendar. I would recommend that that's what you come up with first, so that you decide where you want to prioritize. Is it price? Is it promotion? Do you have gift with purchase? Do you have gift messaging? Is there holiday? Is your product really holiday focused in a way that, maybe it's something seasonal and soft and fluffy, and it just lends itself to being visually appealing for that holiday time period. And you can do that with some visuals or graphic treatments. So there are things that you can do there that would make sense. So I think that that's a good way to do it. I think another thing that people often look and might overlook for the holiday season is to do a quick audit of how your content sits for holiday season. So take the time now to do maybe a quick sentiment analysis. What are your ratings and reviews? Is there anything you could kind of tidy up and clean up and maybe even remove? Are they really talking about something that is applicable? Because you don't want to be misguided or misleading to a consumer. That's never the intention. But if it's not something that rings true, that might be something that could and should be removed. But I do think, overall, where we think that the biggest challenge for holiday is making sure that we're getting ahead of the season in a way that is true and accurate, so that we can pull right into holiday and then have easy updates that we can pull through the season, and then update as soon as we pull out of the season as well.
There's a lot there, especially. I also especially love the phrase fresh and nimble. And before we get to Claudia, really curious about what Claudia has to say about this. But one follow-up question is, when you say that, the sentiment analysis, seeing if the content is landing, what's advice that you would give to someone who's like, okay, I want to do an audit on my content, I want to do a sentiment? What would be your if someone takes that advice and wants to go through with it, what would be a tip that you would give them?
Yeah, so for sentiment analysis, what we're doing is essentially understanding, what is your star rating? What are people saying about your product? So, maybe they have a lot of positive things to say, but they keep getting stuck on this one thing. Well, take that as a learning. So if somebody says, this product is really great, but it does X, Y, Z, and I can't get over that. Address that in your content, because it might be something that they can't overcome, but maybe you can address it in content in a way that kind of hits it out of the ballpark and can educate. Because at the end of the day, that's what content should and is supposed to do, is communicate to the consumer what your product does, and also maybe what it doesn't do, so that you can't necessarily always have that two-way conversation with a consumer that you could have in a showroom or on a sales floor. That's what content does for e-commerce. So this is your sales floor. That is what the ratings and reviews do for you. And let that be that two-way conversation. You might not be able to always answer back to the consumer depending on what platform you're using for sentiment. So be aware and pay attention and answer them through your content.
Love it. The sales floor, content as a sales floor. There's a lot there. Thank you. Good stuff. Claudia, when it comes to preparing for the holidays, what's your biggest challenge that you face for DVF and the work that you do?
Yeah, for anyone who doesn't know, DVF is like a women's ready to wear company. But our biggest challenge for the holiday season is customer acquisition, especially with CAC just increasing in price. It always does in Q4, and it's something to be expected, but the marketing has changed on how like our customers find us, how we talk to them. So that's definitely been our biggest challenge. But outside of that, it has shifted our focus into having conversion be like one of our most important KPIs, because we need to kind of make it worthwhile for that increase in spend in marketing. So just really making sure that we're doing everything from a site perspective, looking at site speed, understanding how our current customer who's already a shopper navigates through the site, and trying to optimize that experience, especially for the new consumers who are coming on. So that's kind of a way how we're trying to combat that biggest challenge for us specifically.
And when your conversion is your highest KPI, what would be a tip that you would say someone wants to increase their conversions? And obviously that's a super crucial point in the funnel and a KPI. What would be your tip to how to increase conversions?
Yeah, I think one is to like really understand your customer behavior and your consumer path, like understanding like how she's coming onto our site. Like if she finds us through like a Facebook paid ad, like 3 times clicking through, finally does a sign up email, it takes her 4 emails to actually come and convert to buy something. It's truly understanding that and trying to shorten the process. So I think just becoming an expert on how your consumer thinks and navigates through your site will definitely help you optimize and increase your conversion rate in a significant way. Even when it comes to like emails and segmentations and things like that, like I know it takes my customer, around like 2.5 months to come revisit to actually buy again. So how do I make that experience as easy and best for her?
Very powerful. Very powerful. It's a really strong tip of understanding the context, understanding the user journey, understanding the customer. So we've heard about content, we've heard about conversions, and there's a lot in there. Frank, Marketing Director, Perry Ellis, what is your biggest challenge in the work that you do when approaching the holiday season?
No, yeah, great question. I think as Alexis and Claudia kind of have already stated, the acquisition side of the house, right? And then from that perspective, when that user is kind of consuming that content, you want to make sure everything is rolling correctly, right? And being interpreted correctly and making sure your messages is on point. So that way, again, over time, you can optimize and your CPA can go down. But then the other part, the big challenge, I think, is after that, when that customer converts, then you actually have to execute on the operational side. So I think one of the biggest things and one of the biggest challenges for this holiday season is going to be actually watching your freight costs and freight expense coming out of that. So what are things that we can do within the organization kind of help mitigate some of that freight out expense, whether it's leveraging BOPIS or BOPA kind of strategies, right? Buy online, pick up in store, buy online, pick up anywhere. What else can we do to kind of offload some of that burden from a freight out expense standpoint? And then, from the retention side of the house, one challenge would be how has your list grown throughout the year, right? Are you still achieving those same levels of growth? So then that way, to Claudia's earlier point, is that you can expect a potential conversion based on your life cycle from that standpoint. And given the little bit higher demand in Q4, hopefully you'll kind of shorten that curve. So those are the things there that I will be watching out for this holiday season and how we can pivot from there.
Really strong. And when you mention retention, what would be I keep on asking this about the tip, but it's a real strong actionable item for everybody listening. What would be a tip for you to increase retention or anything around retention? Because it's a big deal.
Yeah, no. I think there's a couple of things there that come to mind. The initial thing that I would look at from a retention perspective is when you're dividing, your cohorts or your segments between a prospective customer and a already existing customer. Within your life cycle, where are you? Revisit your actual offers on those flows, right? So, are we going to get a little bit more aggressive? Are we going to tailor that different message from the prospective buyer versus a warmer lead that's already previously purchased? How do you kind of tweak that message there? So those would be the two things that I'll be looking at from a segmenting perspective that I can recommend at least to look at for your Q4 activity. Awesome.
Love it. And we're going to cover a lot more. And again, as I mentioned, like from our perspective, the way that we help companies is by understanding all the points where sales drop and companies don't even know. So one of the really interesting e-commerce stats that we discovered is that every single minute brands across all industries lose 25 to 30% of the revenue to bad user experience. So when we're talking about content, when we're talking about conversions, when we're talking about retention, and people are going onto your site, it's obviously crucial to make sure that all of those hidden revenue opportunities are available, but it's important to check all those things. So in other words, it's the small fixes that generate huge results. And we had one client who had an out of stock message. It was just an out of stock message, meaning we're not talking about the whole funnel, just an out of stock message. They fixed that. They were able to generate $3 million by just making that one tweak. So when we talk about record growth and we talk about, it's actually in the small things, and it's the small things in the content, it's the small things in the conversion, small things in the retention. And as everyone, is talking about a recession or layoffs, or it's a tough time for buyers, what would be your best advice, starting with you, Claudia, that you would say to retailers, that you would say to e-commerce directors, marketing directors, people who are in charge of growth for the upcoming holidays, and they hear about recession and they get afraid? What would be your number one advice to give retailers when they hear recession?
Yeah, I think especially coming from COVID, where I think it's a similar thing where you have a lot of customers who are very cautious of what they're spending and how they're spending it. So you need to message to consumers in a way where if we're talking about it, your customer's also talking about it. So just try to understand that. So when you do send emails, when you do send your SMS, or you're doing paid ads, just be very cautious of like how your consumers are also living their day-to-day life, and give them content or speak to them in a way that's not so, please buy this. I think that oftentimes retailers just automatically look at their stock and then they worry that they bought too much, and their main focus like, okay, well, if we do a promotion here, if we mark this down, et cetera, you're also changing your customer behavior, and she's now expecting a promotion or she's expecting a markdown. So just kind of just take like a moment of hindsight and being like, how am I as a consumer also shopping, and reflect that within your messaging, and just kind of look at everything in a different light, where it's not just businesses that are being cautious, but your consumers are being cautious as well. So just keeping that in mind, and just understanding if you do something today, how will that impact you in the next couple of weeks? And I think just looking at COVID, I think a lot of brands struggled with that, because it was just, there's so many markdowns, there was so many sales, and people just felt so fatigued, where they were like, maybe I'll just wait until it just goes deeper, or your product no longer becomes relevant to them, or you as a brand no longer become relevant to them, because there's this sense that you're just like out of touch. So I think that's kind of my best advice, is just, having that moment of clarity and just really understanding the behavior of what's going on for all consumers, not just yours, or the ones you're trying to acquire at least.
It's really powerful. Also, like from your previous segment, you're focusing on the customer. So when people are talking about recession, or you're focused on the customer. Where's the customer at? What are they? So I think that's a huge takeaway, and it's a reframe that can really add a ton of value in the perspective and the mind frame when people are approaching the holiday season. It's all about the customer. Frank, what would be your best advice when retailers hear recession?
Yeah, I've had the, I guess, unfortunate or fortunate experience of going through the '08 recession in my career. The first thing that I kind of learned or was one of my big lessons, depending on the industry, but very consistent across, is that you're going to have that trade down effect from customers. Whether it's fashion apparel, whether it's even just alcohol and spirits. I experienced more of that trade down effect, right? So if you were a buyer that liked to have imported beers, then you were probably trading down to domestic beers. And then if you were doing domestic beers, then you were going to, trade down to something a little bit more price conscious from that perspective. So be prepared for that. Look for that shifting consumer behavior that you're going to see as recession, amplifies, or those recession talks amplify. You're going to probably experience a little bit more of those budget cuts, right? So as Alexis and Claudia mentioned, CPA costs are going to continue to kind of fluctuate. So, what from a marketing department, usually that's one of the expenses that you're going to try to control. So in that way you can either improve your bottom line from a margin perspective, or, as Claudia kind of was mentioning a little bit earlier, you're going to probably want to right size your inventory a little bit more. So I think those are the things there that you're going to have to kind of prepare for as recession talks continue to kind of, expand and increase in chatter. So those would be the tips that I can give you based on my experience.
Really, really solid, really smart. Appreciate it. And yeah, I'm sure you have a lot more to say, also having gone through professionally the 2008 experience to now everything in between. And I think maybe similar to Claudia, where focusing on the customer, maybe Frank, there's also something about focusing on the context, meaning it might just be a wave. And speaking of waves, I love this, sharing the stat, because one of the big things that every brand in the world, for more or less, does in the holidays is do promo codes, do gift cards, do giveaways, do savings, and they give coupons, they give codes. And from our research, we found we manage 388 million pages a month. We've seen that 39% of coupon and promo codes fail on their first attempt, which means that you're giving out sales. It's crucial to know that all of your customers are trying to buy, and it's not even working. So when we hear about upcoming recession, people buying less, it turns out that there's a huge chunk of your audience who are actively buying and they can't even buy. Meaning it's those small tweaks, turn fails into sales, those small little tweaks that can generate revenue, which is an important message from my perspective, because it's the small things that are actionable and that generate results. You just need to be able to see it. And that's part of the user journey. So going back to Alexis, what would be your tips? What would be your advice? What would be your best strategic advice that you can give retailers on how to give their users an optimal journey that's frictionless?
So I always consider e-commerce to be fluid, right? So optimize what you can in real time, meaning we're considering holiday to be, the pinnacle of e-commerce season, and it is kind of our Super Bowl, if you will. So we go into it and we optimize everything that we can and get it ready. And I do what I can myself so that I don't have to always consult with others. I don't always need to get a graphic designer involved, or I don't always need to get a supply chain manager or, other business managers involved, if I can, to make things as frictionless and quick, make some quick down and dirty optimizations. If I can update titles with keywords on self-service platforms or, an e-commerce platform if I can. So do those types of things. But remember that, e-commerce is a funnel, and your shoppers are going to be coming through in different phases in their shopping journey. So be ready to meet them where they are. and provide them with content that's going to help them convert wherever they are. So if they're coming through on a specific landing page, provide them with the information that they're going to need to help them to convert. Similarly, if they're on the PDP, give them their information there to make it easy to help them to drive those conversions. Because at the end of the day, you know, content really is about educating and informing to help to drive the conversions. But really, you know, make it optimal and frictionless by preparing your assets, prepare your search terms for holiday messaging, optimize and sync with your media campaigns. You know, this is not a one-way street. You're going to be working with other teams. Media is going to play a big role in much of what e-commerce holistically is doing. So make it easy for your media teams. Consult with them. What paid campaigns are you doing? I can make some influences to make organic search perform well. How can I help you to make those paid campaigns work well? Let's consult. Let's partner on this together. So I think that those are some things that we can do to make this as optimal and frictionless as possible.
Awesome. And when you say prepare, right? So it's like end of October, where we got a little bit of a window before the holidays. What would be your timeline in terms of schedule that would be the best time, other than, I'm inserting this yesterday, but what would be your advice on that?
It's not too late. So we know that, you know, there have been some lead ups into this seasonal preparedness, as we saw Amazon and Target, and, you know, Webeyez is happening today and tomorrow. There are seasonal pushes happening earlier and earlier for seasonal promotions. That's what they want, and we know that it's happening sooner and sooner, but there is going to be some fatigue from a consumer. So you almost have to compartmentalize it from, there are these promotional activities that are going to be happening, and you have to participate with as much as your brand or as comfortable as you are, or where you can afford, and what your profitability is and what you can expect. But like I said earlier, develop a content calendar. Next year, start considering it July, August. Start planning it out so that you can have that roadmap for lead up while you're in season. And then you've got a lead out period, because you've got this audience, and you're going to have audiences that are coming into your funnel maybe for the first time, and maybe you can conquest it now. This could be your opportunity to have some of those people that come in, might be new to brand. Can you conquest them? Can you switch them from a different brand to your brand that you hadn't had before? Powerful.
It's awesome to start the holiday planning in July. That's brilliant and super helpful. Claudia, what's your best strategic, actionable tips and advice to help retailers that they can optimize their user journey to make it optimal and frictionless?
Yeah, I think one of the big takeaways where you should be, this is something you do on a day-to-day basis, but definitely look at it pre-holiday season, is truly study your 404 pages, study your search terms, study your collection pages that have like a high exit rate, bounce rate, and like truly understand those KPIs, because during the holiday period, you know, again, we're very customer centric, which I think in this day and age you have to be, but like once you understand, you know, those types of like KPIs and like understand like how she's navigating, there's a lot you can do. One thing that we actually learned is by, you know, we utilize like Google Trends often, like we are experts on our product, but we shouldn't expect our customers to necessarily be. So we were looking at our search terms and we were like, wait a second, she's like really looking for sweater dresses. Internally amongst like people who are in the fashion industry, we just label them as knits. So like all of our copy, all of our titles, all of our messaging was around just like knit products. But we learned that she wasn't able to really find what she was looking for, because technically speaking, that is not the right way to talk about a product. But however, that is how our customer behaves, and that is how she's actually looking. So we decided to like, okay, we're going to update our copy. We're going to make sure that, you know, utilizing like the data that's available, that's also free. It's not like you have to ask for additional support or anything like that, and optimize in that way. And I do want to touch on something that Alexis had said about like content calendar planning, like especially within the fashion industry. We always look at our competitors and do like hindsight and postmortems of like what we could be doing, especially after an event. I think it's really easy to say like, oh, like, yeah, I did see that like one email from said brand. It was good. Like, take a snippet, put it in a Google Doc for you to remember for later. So like when you go in for that next season, you're better prepared. Same thing with promotional dates and all of those little items. Like there's a website, it's escaping me, but you could actually click on a certain date like 5 years ago, and it'll show you what their homepage was. So you could learn and like understand of like, oh, okay, like my competitor did this like a year ago, and this is how they messaged it, but it looks good. Or like we were actually too early for promotions, and that's why we didn't see like an uplift in that like later day. But really just kind of like using the data you have and just making it like better decisions like as a result.
Brilliant. That's a really cool strategy. Also, never thought of going. I think it's called the Wayback Machine.
Yeah,
Archive dot. If anybody knows, archive.net. I don't remember, but that's really cool and innovative. And to the 404 pages, we had a client who they were driving traffic and they didn't even know it to a 404 page, and they were losing money, and they didn't know why their ads weren't converting, and they thought it was the creative, they thought it was the copy. Turns out they were driving traffic to a 404 page. So it's really important to know that. Love it. And another, this is, I mean, from our perspective, it's we see it day in and day out. Like when we're talking about hitting growth, record sales in e-commerce and marketing in online retail, there are those small things like the 404 pages, like the out of stock messages, et cetera, that are actually losing revenue without the companies knowing. So there was one client who was losing $357,000 a week, an e-commerce giant, from just 2 site errors. So in checking all those things, it's not simply, maintenance. This is actually digging for gold when you're able to find it. So what would you say is starting back with Alexis? How would you answer this question? What's your best strategic advice when approaching the holiday season this year?
My recommendation is to get your house in order. As I mentioned, it's not too late. Now is the time. You have a couple of weeks before that big holiday push really does begin. Content that's ready and optimized is just going to be more likely to convert, and it's going to build loyalty. You're going to have more eyes on your pages now than you are most likely the rest of the season, depending on what your product type is. Of course, there are different categories that is unlikely, or there might be some caveats there. But also be sure that you're in a good stock position. There are ebbs and flows, and have a plan B as things go out of stock, or maybe one product goes out of stock but something else is in stock. Talk to your media team and be able to pivot and think about where you can make substitutes on your homepage graphics, or if you have a landing page that needs to be updated, just be able to pivot and be flexible. Content should be nimble. You need to be flexible this time of year. Things are going to sell through. You're going to have out of stocks. Things will happen. That's what happens with e-commerce. It happens in all stages of retail. So just be able to be flexible. And I think that, that will help you to gain in the long run. And don't be afraid to just have that messaging, whether it's email, whether it's social, or it's landing page, homepage, whatnot, but to be flexible. I also mentioned, timing of promotions ebbs and flows. We've seen it move up, with Target and Amazon running promotions earlier and earlier. Things are also going to start running later. Ship dates, for last guaranteed deliveries are going to go out later. So you're also going to have to plan content to go and spread longer. So how are you going to message without having over fatigue? So those are things that you're going to have to think about as well. So consider how you're going to stay the course long term. Because at the end of the day, holiday is going to end and you're going to have to ramp up to get into January and think about fresh messaging and fresh content that isn't going to just be driven by pricing or promotions or whatever the holiday message had been. Your brand story, your overall education points of view can't just be all about holiday. So don't lose sight of that as well.
What would be your tip when someone is, okay, they obviously can't send promotions 24/7. The holidays are, as you said, a window in time, and then they'll be passed. And then so you got to think about, not fatiguing your base. What would be a tip that you would have to strategically approach the messaging, the content, and even the pacing?
So, what Claudia mentioned was having that span and looking at, where the competitors are, what have your data points been over time. Look and see what your last few years have been. Like, what email sends performed well? What were those dates that historically have done well? Leverage that. You don't have to send every single day for email. You don't have to always have an on-site promotion happening. Those are the types of things, as from a business management point of view, you can discuss. But from a content point of view, what's fresh and different about your product? Focus on the reason to believe. If it's a holiday centric product, if it's gift with purchase, if there's a gift messaging, this product lends itself well to gifting. It doesn't always have to be about that discount or other thing. It can still feel holiday without having those types of other messages as well. Be creative and think outside of the box and leverage a content calendar. That's why you're doing the planning ahead of time.
Yeah, very powerful. Also, the other side of the holiday is, being with family, and there's a brand, there's a narrative, there's a story, not just like you said in the discount and the sale. There's a bigger brand story that it's an opportunity to sell because people are paying attention. I love that. Frank, what's your best strategic advice when approaching the holiday season this year for retailers?
I think I'm going to build off of Miss Alexis, earlier comment of get your house in order, right? At this point in time, you've already kind of planned and prepped. It's time to execute. So, to me, when it comes down to executing, the first thing that you want to make sure is that as Alexis and Claudia have mentioned, audit your flows, go, kind of follow that user journey, right? From a mobile phone, from an iPad, your desktop experience, how is it, how are your email flows from acquisition? What are those behavioral triggers looking like, right? Do you need to make any adjustments from that perspective? But make sure that the data is still flowing in and being captured. So again, you want to make sure that your machine is well oiled at this point in time, and that's what you mean, that you're ready to execute. I think that the second thing that comes to mind here is, keep in mind, to what Alexis was saying, that you also want to have some contingency plans here, right? Last year, the narrative was around, stressed supply chains, right? Not having product in time for the holidays. This year, the narrative kind of shifts to inflation. So, again, as you're revisiting your flows, does it make sense to kind of tweak the copy a little bit more to show value oriented, or to show some value pricing strategies or messaging from that perspective? So again, kind of have those kind of contingencies in place, because you may have to pivot as you're trying to optimize your media plans for during the holiday, and the same thing with your email conversions and site pages. And then the last thing that I would kind of leave our webinar panelists here and our participants is actually take a look at your consider starting an actual holiday cohort. So as you get into Black Friday, Cyber Monday, just kind of begin collecting that particular cohort. So in that way, you can start setting yourself up for success in the following year, right? So that way, hey, this is a segment that we started during this time frame. How do they behave over time? What are things there that we're going to do to kind of potentially improve our LTV or even our frequency from that perspective? So those are the three things to me that come to mind as we prepare into holiday and beyond.
Brilliant. And can you go one step like deeper on the cohort? What would be like a takeaway? So someone's thinking like to segment their planning. What would be your advice around the cohorting specifically?
So there's a couple of things depending on, what your objectives are. But to me, at least as a time-based cohort, you're taking a look at, you can even separate, hey, here are my Black Friday, converters or purchasers, and here are my Cyber Monday converters. So then from that perspective, you will take a look at what did we offer, from that standpoint. What was the merchandising strategy there? Did you have specific or different doorbusters? What was your from a merchandise mix perspective, what was your Pareto rule, right? What was actually driving those conversions? So in that way, again, as you kind of look out for the rest of the year, what's going to get that customer to potentially come back and buy from you again? So those would be the things there that I would suggest in terms of setting up some cohorts and segments.
Brilliant. And I think there's also been a theme around context. Like Claudia first message said, check out what websites we're doing, a while ago, could even be years ago. And Alexis was mentioning, what's already worked for you. And so you're also mentioning like what performed well. So I think that's also really important. Like you're not starting from complete scratch. You have context, and that can be super insightful and super helpful. And now we are going to do a live Q&A. And just before, so if you guys have questions this is a world-renowned opportunity to ask leaders from DVF, Perry Ellis, Gorilla Group, Frank, Alexis, and Claudia, anything live. So type it in the Q&A. And maybe just to start things off, because if you're an executive, if you're an online brand, obviously this is a big opportunity around the holidays, as we've been mentioning. What would be a little bit shifting of topic, but it's the same topic, which is starting with Frank, when you mentioned that, hey, I was through this in 2008. So not only is there a strategic approach in terms of marketing and growing and managing the supply chain and all of those elements, but there's also the internal element of like, how do you actually deal with the pressure of that, or the stress of that, or the down of that? How do you internally, what would be advice that you would give, in managing, at least starting with the 2008, for people who might be dealing with some like very intense situations at work?
Yeah, it's a great question, Ari. I think, one of the things that I've tried to kind of help me through that and through my career and this journey is actually just try not to panic. Just kind of remove yourself from, that particular environment. Just kind of look at it from an outsider's perspective. Try not to get, emotional from that standpoint, because again, it's not going to be good for you on and your team, how you're going to react to that, right? So just kind of take a look at the actual, facts at this point. What are the numbers looking like? It's not going to be the first rodeo from that perspective. Every business, whether we're in a recession cycle or not, every business has downturns. So, it's just kind of learning from those perspectives, right? And again, there are several strategies that you can look into that, and you just got to find those root causes, whether it was inventory related, whether it was margin compression, that you would want to take a look at. But again, the whole thing is not to let it overwhelm you, right? You just want to take a step back, take a deep breath, and just say, all right, we're going to tackle it one bit at a time, one layer at a time, and then just kind of keep peeling the onion, and you're going to find those root causes. And then from there, you actually, prepare a plan and you go and try to execute as best you can.
Powerful, brilliant. I think anybody hearing that is going to feel calm just hearing you explain that. Also, throw it back also to Alexis if you have any thoughts or insights on that specifically.
I agree with Frank. I also was working in that time period. I was pretty young in my career and just feeling a bit of the stress of it, of uncertainty and not sure exactly, what was going to happen, and being a bit naive to it, I think. So I definitely can commiserate with that and feeling of, let's just do one thing at a time. So that definitely rings true. And I'd say even today, whether or not, however the economy shakes out, it rings the same, just based on the seasonality of it. We have a lot going on this time of year, with, a lot of pressures from the retail point of view, as well as family commitments. I have 2 daughters and I have holiday magic to provide. And so I'm trying to do the same thing, just take it day by day and one step at a time, and do the best I can. And that's why planning ahead and getting, laying that foundation work, I think is really key.
Beautiful. Love it. So if you do have questions, now is the time to type it into the Q&A or the chat. We're going to be going in live for only a little bit more time, so write your questions in now. I'm going to throw a question to Claudia that I'm interested in hearing your take on. DVF is a very unique, historic, you could almost say, fashion brand. How do you think of, there's obviously no amount, there's no lack of competition. How do you stand out as a brand from your strategic approach when women have so many opportunities to buy anything? What's your advice to stand out in such a busy, crowded market?
I think with DVF specific, it'll be slightly different. Like historically in my career, I've only worked for like big box brands, like specifically department stores. So coming to DVF, it's been a different journey and a different experience when it comes to email, SMS, paid marketing, all of it. We're fortunate that we have like a founder. There's a brand within her. There's a brand within ourselves. So people have a different expectation, where when you look at like Macy's is a perfect example. Like the normal day person wouldn't really know who started Macy's, who the founder is. Like it's a very different conversation. So I think we're very lucky in that aspect, where we could hone in on like a celebrity touch and feel, where we're naturally off the bat already a very personable brand. Like people feel like they know us because they know who she is. But with that being said, and it kind of goes back to the recession question, I think for other brands, like I don't remember a time where, especially like 5-10 years ago, where you would see on LinkedIn, and I think this is a credit to LinkedIn, where most brands now have to make a public statement of, unfortunately, we're letting people go, or unfortunately, this is what we have to do. So there is that kind of community touch that you need to be a part of in order to stay relevant. And I think for smaller brands, that's a really big challenging thing for them, because they're also trying to, establish their voice to the market. So definitely just being very relevant from a community touch point, I think is super important. We try to do that as a brand, where we try to go for, professional women, or understanding their day-to-day lives and how we can touch on that. Like Cartier, I believe they're like opening up like hotels, right? That's the way that they're trying to be a part of their customer's journey, customer's life without, selling them a watch or a piece of jewelry. So we try to do the same thing with like philanthropy, like store events, pop-ups that have nothing to do with selling at all, and aspects like that. So I think just like that community building within your brand is super important. That we're very lucky. I think we're the only brand historically that had a chief of philanthropy for over 30 years. Where like now that's like a new role that people are companies that are hiring. So I think definitely touching on that, because I believe like, especially like younger millennials, Gen Zers, they want to shop with a brand that is community oriented. And that's super important. That will be a decision maker for them. So getting ahead of that, you kind of just need to just be, I guess, like aware of like the environment and, having that conversation without, being so focused on sales. And being able to say that to your senior leadership team, I think is also very important, because I think oftentimes people just look at growth. And I think we're at a point where we just are, we want to be sustainable in any way we could. And a large part of that is to not buy a lot, and being very cautious of that.
When you say community oriented, what's your tip to be community oriented? I am also hearing, and correct me if I'm wrong, there's also a story element to it, because there's a certain story element to how you tell the stories around the products. But I'm curious what you have to say about that. In other words, like a tip around being community oriented, and does it have to do with storytelling?
Yeah, I think so. And I think it just depends. Sophia just mentioned, and she loves all the DVF around like women empowerment. And it is true to kind of make sure that you have that storytelling. And I mean, for women empowerment, obviously it's a very gender specific thing that we try to definitely voice. But I think we're very thoughtful of like, if we do something, there's a reason as to why, and like why we want to do it. And we kind of create a conversation about that in itself. And it doesn't have to be, charity, or because I understand like also like donating, especially when you're looking at your profit line, that could be very challenging for like other brands to do so. But it could be a networking event, being like, I understand, you like, there's a need for it, and there's a need for this, and there's a desire for, interaction again, especially for big cities where maybe your friends have left, but you're still here. And just kind of having that in a very personal way, being like, yeah. And I think like Target did something on TikTok where it was so relevant, and it was basically a social media manager complaining about their legal team. And the likes in the comments were like, thank you so much, because like we're dealing with that too. And I think we often forget that your customers have a job, because like, so like having that personal space of like, oh yeah, like we deal with the same thing you deal with, and having that conversation just makes you, it brings up your likeness as a brand and as an identity. So I think just being very purposeful as to why we do something. And it's like there are 3 reasons. Like if you can't explain why you're going to do this and give you at least like 3 reasons as to why, then you probably shouldn't be doing it. So that's kind of how we go about it.
Super powerful. Also indicative from Sophia's response, but I think that you obviously have a lot to say, and it's super valuable and insightful for a lot of brands. Taking it back to Perry Ellis, Frank. So what are your thoughts around that? And Perry Ellis is a different brand than DVF. What are your insights around community building, storytelling, having a different element of engagement, maybe even on the younger generation who are looking for a deeper relationship with the brand? Is that something that you're thinking about? How do you approach it?
Yeah, I would say those conversations are being had, and again, there's initiatives that we already have in place, obviously to try to help build, community, or even just other type of social responsibility to it. So example, in Original Penguin, we try to give to a penguin organization to kind of help conserve those habitats, beyond Earth Day. There is the focus around sustainable efforts, sustainable fabrics and materials. So again, from a CSR perspective, and to Claudia's point, you want to try to make sure that you're being authentic. Honestly, I think that's kind of the big takeaway, from Claudia's earlier point, that all brands are trying to balance, right? Because you don't want to, you want to try to make sure that you're giving that right effort to the community, and you're trying to talk to your customers and listen to them and take their feedback, but then don't come across as, big corporate or disingenuous, right? So I think that's kind of the fine balance that all organizations are trying to have here. Other things that we are doing as well to kind of, talk to, the younger generations, in terms of Gen Z, or obviously the young millennials that are on those fringe and cut years, is, who are we collaborating with? Who are we associating ourselves with? That can kind of help lend a new voice of freshness and credibility, and introduce our brand to those audiences, right? And again, because we have such established legacy brands, that we also have to try to remain relevant and come across in an original style, an original way, in an original voice, to some of those younger audiences who may never have come across our brands, right? So I think to kind of echo Claudia's point is just making sure that you are being authentic, and that approach itself has to make sure that is relevant to those audiences.
That's really powerful. Also, because I think if we think holistically about what's going on in the world, and just the amount of noise from a content perspective, from the opportunity for any customer to buy any kind of thing that they need from a number of different retailers or brands or vendors, if they have a relationship with the brand, it's something entirely different. And maybe that is it's a needle mover, it's an X factor, it's a different element. And if you have a deeper relationship with the brand, then the holiday messaging, the discount conversions, the KPIs, and all the small details sort of fit into a bigger picture where maybe the customer, if they're over fatigued, maybe they'd be forgiving of it because they have a heart-centric relationship with the brand. Maybe to finish it off with Alexis as a content strategist, and for Gorilla, and working with a number of different brands. Curious on your thoughts around that. Is having a more authentic relationship with the consumer, with the customer, a needle mover in the holiday season and in general?
I would say definitely. I'd say, that is something that we definitely try to push the clients that might not see the value. There are, I'll be frank, there aren't many that don't see the value at this point. There are few and far between. Most understand that this is a position that they are passionate about on their own. And we just help them to either develop the content and put it out there, and publish it in a way that is meaningful and makes sense, and help them to prioritize it in the appropriate places. There have been a few where, we understand, it's a lower priority for us. And that's our opportunity to say, this is something that is meaningful, especially with some of the generations that you're trying to connect with. And these are the reasons why, and you need to develop some storytelling. Storytelling isn't really the word I should use here, but you need to have that brand connectivity so that we can help you to connect to them. And once they see it and understand that if you can help with this, that it will really connect the dots and resonate with your consumers, they get it, and people are passionate about it, and it's not going anywhere. People want to know, and they want it across channels too. It's not just e-commerce. You need to have it on your social your own branded websites, if it's on Marketplace, your LinkedIn, it needs to be everywhere, and it needs to be consistent, so that it's not just you set it and forget it. It's something that you need to keep up with and update all the time.
Amazing. I think I could probably spend lots more time asking you guys questions, and I think you have a lot to say. You have a lot of experience, a lot of expertise. I want to thank you for taking your time, sharing your expertise with everybody, and everybody who's watching this now and who will ever watch it has a lot of gold to put to use to hit record sales in the holiday season and beyond. So thank you so much for joining, for participating, for showing up, for being awesome, for sharing your insights. Also loved how it ended around authenticity and community. So thank you. And hope to see you soon. And maybe we'll hear how the holidays went. And then we'll do a debrief. Anyways, really appreciate it. And thank you guys.
Enjoy your holiday, and good luck, everyone. Take care. Thank you.